Hello. Okay, so yeah, as Gemma said, we've heard a lot about certain types of distraction. So this is a slight tangent on what we've been discussing. So this is going to be focused on this sort of tech. I'm not talking about what's on the mobile phone, but there's been a movement towards moving infotainment stuff into the hardware of a car. So if you buy a new Ford, you can then have Spotify or Apple Play built into the dashboard of the car. Naturally, while speccing up my new Ferrari, I was looking at how much that would cost, and it's about $7,000 to have that in your Ferrari, but Ford have it in all of their cars, Mazda, and so on. So what we wanted to do was to look at the effect of this technology against other distraction behaviors. And in doing so, what we did, we used our simulator and we used a Samsung tablet inside a simulator car. And here is that car. So you've heard about having half a Jaguar somewhere. So we've got a full Peugeot, so I'm not sure which you'd prefer, which is more reliable. So this is a simulator. This is about £500,000 worth of nerd. So you've got a 720-degree visibility. You can see there on the rear, but you can see in the mirrors behind you as well. We've got a control room beside it, so it avoids the need to go into the drive when people are driving at 70. It's very unusual to see a person next to you when you're driving at 70. So, but if you're in an urban environment, it's okay to talk to people as long as you do this next to the car. So anyway, I'm being silly because it's the afternoon. So it's natural to put in something about the sample size. There's nothing particularly interesting here, but this is who we worked or looked at. 20 people split by Apple CarPlay and Apple Android Auto. Right. I've read this thousands of times and I've just forgotten what that was called. So what did we do? So we have the two types of technology on the left-hand side, and then in the simulator, what you do, you'll hear me say, relative to the control drive. So you put people in the simulator and you say, please drive for 15 minutes with nothing. So you just leave them to it. They tend to sort of swerve around and they try the brakes. And then you say, okay, please now drive as you normally would drive. So they drive, and that becomes our baseline of their behavior against which we compare other stuff. So then once they've done the control drive, we tested a series of things which I'll mention on my next slide that are voice-enabled. So we were looking at the difference between voice-enabled stuff and touch-enabled stuff. So then what did we measure? Driving behavior is measured in the simulator with the computers that measures speed, close following, lane position, all other manner of things that are collected by the car. And then we recorded everyone's face and timed how long they took whilst looking away from ahead of the vehicle. Then we looked at reaction time. So this is the important thing, which I'll talk about. We put a red bar in front of people, and then we counted the number of times that they missed that red bar. So when you flash the red bar, we said, click the indicator stalk, and that tells us that they've spotted that stimulus. And then we asked people how they thought their driving was, or how distracted they were, and so on. So there's the red bar, and over on the left-hand side, that's the process of the timeline. So everyone went through the same thing, and the red bar flashes up at those points through the process. So if I go to the far side, car following means that they're in the simulator and cars were going from 50 up to 70 and back, so we're trying to simulate real road conditions. And then the erratic traffic, we just say people just drive as normal, so cars will be at different speeds, there'll be trucks and they'll move around. And then on the curve following, people drive around a figure of 8 and we say, stay in your lane, which I've been told a few times in my life, but so stay in your lane, and then they're asked to respond to the red bar again. Right, so I'm skipping to results pretty quickly. So what did we find? there was just a baseline finding that interacting with any of these vehicle systems whilst driving can be has a negative effect on performance. So when we look at that diagram in the middle, what we're seeing is that when talking to these systems, people were inside the NHTSA's guidelines of what was acceptable. So what those guidelines say, is that the two numbers that are important are 2 seconds and 12 seconds. So the eye gaze can't be more than 2 seconds away from the road, and the total number of time can't be more than 12 seconds. So we've just heard what can happen at 16 seconds. So I'm not qualified to say whether those guidelines are acceptable or not, but what we did is we tested within those guidelines. So what we found was that when using Android Audio or Apple CarPlay to do those things, voice was within those guidelines. When the participants were doing it by touch, they were outside of those guidelines. So there's a physical, Gemma's talked about the physical, the mental, and the visual. So when people look away from the road, what they do is they are missing the visual cues that they're expected to respond to. So in specific cases, so if there were 80 reaction time events that people had to click, when across all of the people's drives, 14 times during the touch drive, someone missed that red bar. And bear in mind that that red bar appears for 10 seconds. Okay, it's a worrying thought. So do something, type in something, but touch it. So 14 times. 5 times they missed it whilst doing the voice bit. So again, 10 seconds, they missed that 5 times. But some people missed it even during the control drive, which is quite unbelievable, really, but I'll be kind to people that it's a very strange environment, and so on. So then with Apple CarPlay, we had 76 reaction events, so very similar. But again, 14 times they missed that red bar whilst touching the system, and then 8 times in the voice and twice in the control. So there's clearly issues here with looking away from the road and so on. So then reaction times when selecting music were significantly increased. You can see what the increase is there with voice and touching the phone. But then the things that are on these slides are going to be very familiar for you and to you. So they failed to react to the red bars more often compared to the control drive. They could keep their eyes on the road when using voice, fairly, as we would expect. But most people report using touch phones in their normal day-to-day life than they do voice activation. So we've got a bit of a problem here with what people use day-to-day and the effect of that. So they're aware of it. They're aware of the distracting effects of interacting with the systems with touch, but they underestimated the amount of distraction they thought that it was causing them. So they know that it's dangerous, but they think it's less dangerous than it actually is in terms of their own behavior. So in terms of what we measured while they were on the road, so people struggle to maintain the distance in the car in front, so that means as cars are braking and speeding up, people are getting closer, braking, which could explain why they're missing these sort of stimulus events as well, because their attention is spread across more things. We saw people reducing, either consciously or subconsciously, their speed when their brain is sort of saying, oh, I've got some hard stuff to do here, I better slow down. So we saw that happen a lot. But when they did reduce their speed, it still wasn't enough to compensate for the task that they needed to do. So even though they thought, I'll slow down to order this, to do the sat-nav task, it wasn't good enough to do the task successfully. And then here's the sort of, slightly worrying thing here is that even when, the increase in reaction time would mean that they were traveling 4 to 5 car lengths on a motorway at 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour. So there's some really challenging findings there. Then, this, I know we've got journalists in the room, but this is the thing that's going to get me in the Daily Mail. Right. This needs to come with a few caveats. So over here on the right-hand side, the alcohol one, this is the, I see someone taking a picture, so I'm going to be on Piers Morgan or something tomorrow. Right, so, so we've got the alcohol measurement. That is the sort of baseline benchmark study that was done in the year 2000, around that sort of time. And then everything beyond that is an attempt to match across all of those. So that it's not perfect science. And the reason why that is the way that we measure distraction and reaction time has changed slightly over those years. But this is pretty close to a reasonable comparison. The other thing to remember is that alcohol is a continual effect. So and that was at the drink driving limit that was measured. So that's a continual effect over the whole journey, whereas what we're looking at on the far left-hand side is a sort of instant distraction. So you're distracted, and then you're not distracted. You're distracted, then you're not distracted. Noting the fact that there is a cognitive distraction that keeps going. So as you can see over on the left-hand side, it's all clustered around touch. It's all looking around, looking away from the road. And then we're into handheld, and then we're into sort of the voice and texting, and then hands-free and cannabis. But all of this stuff is still very worrying. I think that's really all I wanted to say on that one. So, but with those two caveats. And really, I've rattled through it, but I think the point that, as well as the things that have been said about the amount of distraction, the risk of distraction and attention, what we have here is a situation where commercial marketers are trying to get stuff into the public's car under the radar through OEMs, and it's not really captured by any legislation because it's just touchy and it's kind of built into the car. So something for us to think about. The other point I was going to make is that we've mentioned autonomous vehicles before today. We're nowhere near that yet. So even though in future it'd be great that we can use this voice activation stuff, we're nowhere near being able to jump in a car and I'm able to watch Netflix and come to Milton Keynes in my autonomous Ferrari. We're nowhere near that. So we've got to be able to think of ways to manage these these components that are very distracting. So I was going to go different ways depending on how grumpy I was. So I think that's the point I'd make, that manufacturers are finding ways to make us multitask whilst multitasking with the task of driving. So I think that's a reasonable grumpy way to end. Thank you.